Majete is more than just a wildlife reserve. It is a land of secrets, etched into the soil, carried in the roar of lions and the whisper of the Shire River. Once silenced by the years of loss, Majete now tells a story of rebirth, of rhinos retained, of elephants reclaiming their paths, of a wilderness that refused to die. Yet, beneath the safari glamour lies a deeper truth, a hidden heartbeat waiting to be heard. The untold stories of Majete are not just about animals, but about courage, sacrifice, and transformation. They are about rangers who walk into the night with nothing but conviction, about villages that turned from poaching to protecting, and about a landscape that healed against all odds. To know Majete is to step into a tale still unfolding, where every track in the dust is a reminder that survival itself is a story worth telling. A story that is mostly told in different ways, ends with a loud unison, conquering the end game, rebirth and hope. John Adendorff is the park manager for Majete Wildlife Reserve, and he tells our today's story of Majete before African parks and how everything has changed to date.
In 2003, Majete was a reserve that was struggling. It was a reserve and not a national park. Back in the day, wasn't much happening. There were no tourists visiting the park. The wildlife had pretty much been decimated. Only very small species remained on the landscape. And we had people starting to deforest the area. So there was wood logging going on. There was charcoal ovens. But the community had no other means of generating a living out of this landscape, so it was to be expected. But it was really not good, and you couldn't compare it to other national parks in Malawi. It is a reserve, like I said, so it doesn't carry the national park status. And at the time, there were very few people in the reserve managing it. There was a couple of rangers. They had one vehicle. And the infrastructure you see today was a far cry. Back then, they hardly had any infrastructure available to them. And also, what is very significant, it wasn't fenced, so it was an open system. People could move in and out of the system, and so too the wildlife that remained. So I think as far as wildlife goes, there was very little left. Even the birds had gone silent. Bird poaching was there as well. There was very little wildlife. The species that remained were duiker, some bush pig, some of the really small animals that were on the landscape, mongoose and things like that. But most of the species we've actually brought back into Majete. So, people talk about when you find spider webs on a path, an animal path, that means the animals aren't breaking those spider webs anymore, and it means that the animals are gone extinct in a localized manner on the landscape. So very, very little remained on the landscape. Most of what you see today has been brought back into Majete. I think it was, at the time, there were some issues and mostly poachers in the area. We can't think of the community that you have today. The community has grown in size dramatically. And it's also because Majete is here. People have moved to the area for employment and seen opportunities. Back then, there were far less people, and the people that were here were utilizing the land. They were coming in, and at the time, the department wasn't able to protect the land sufficiently. So there was conflict, definitely. But as soon as communities realize that this is to their benefit, things start changing. But it doesn't happen overnight. It takes time to change the mindset as well. Well, I think government, you've got to take your hat off to people like Leonard Sefu, who was the director of parks in the day. He was approached by a gentleman called Anthony Allmartin, who was a South African who used to work for South African parks. But he did his doctorate in Malawi and worked in Luwande National Park. And actually, when he came on board and approached the Malawi government, in particular Mr. Leonard Sefu, he wanted to try and suggest that we manage Luwande National Park rather. And back then, Mr. Sefu and government suggested no, rather try and cut your teeth on something like Majete, which was a reserve that was in desperate need of help. So one can really give a lot of credit to the management at the time, and one of them being in particular Mr. Leonard Sefu.
According to Adendorff, The switch was not that easy, as the people around Majete weren't too sure of what they were getting into. But with time, they have achieved a lot together.
I think people were skeptical of our intentions, but immediately we set out, we recognized without the community we wouldn't succeed. So we had a different type of approach to other conservation organizations and worked very closely with the community, but at the same time put all the effort into conservation and also slowly but surely try and create an economic model that's going to be sustainable in future and create jobs for people. But in the beginning, we had to put up a fence because you have to basically say this is park property and that's community property. A lot of people think it's only to keep people out, but it's not the case. It's to protect people from wildlife, because we had to bring in species like the big five, which include lions, buffalo, elephant, and those are dangerous species. If they break out, they can cause problems within communities. So a fence had to be constructed, and that, I think we started buying favor over time. You know, we're 22 years into this relationship, and we've just come from a community meeting this morning where you can see we've got big participation from all the group village headmen around the reserve, and then we've also got all the patrons around the reserve that support us. So we've come a long way, but I don't think we must be under any disillusion that things were great in the beginning. You've got to persuade people and you've got to gain people's trust over time. Well, the biggest milestone is our community relationship. I still pinch myself and look at the incredible amount of work we've done out there and supported through scholarships, building schools, building clinics, creating water boreholes for people so they got water on their doorstep and not having to walk miles to get water. We've created various agricultural projects out there. There's also the Honey with Heart project, where we support a massive amount of beehives in the community and buy honey from the community members. So we're always trying to uplift the community at the same time and also create employment. Majete today has 186 employees. Most of those are permanent positions, and they all mostly come from local communities around Majete. And then in a given year, we can employ anything from 300 to 600 casual labor to come in and support us as well. So this community around Majete benefits directly from conservation. I think if you go back and you see that in 2002 there was no tourists, nothing. 2003, exactly 3 tourists. And today we have over 13,000 tourists visiting Majete. So it's exponential over time. But I think the big interventions is when we see the fence go up and we see that we now can start introducing wildlife, and we brought elephants back onto the landscape, we brought rhino back onto the landscape, we brought lions back onto the landscape. These are all those token species that the public wants to see. They hear about the big five and they go all over Africa to go and see them. And once you can do that, you're going to start attracting a market of people that are going to start supporting you and also creating a basis for sustainability. Well, personally proud of that we can coexist in a landscape where there are lots of people around us that are struggling, but at the same time they respect us and they respect what we're doing on the landscape and actually give people hope. And I think that's the biggest accolade for us as African Parks, that we can coexist with the community and say conservation pays, and conservation can be a form of landscape use that is beneficial to everybody, and not only the local people, but as a country it's beneficial. It brings in forex that's desperately needed. But then also being part of meta-population management, and what I mean by that is it's a scientific term, but we've brought wild dogs on the landscape. They're critically endangered animals, and we protect them in Malawi, we protect them in Majete. We've got threatened species, lions are threatened, we protect them in Majete. We protect black rhino, which are verging on the status of critically endangered. They are endangered. We've got a nice core population of black rhino in Majete, and they're doing well. From day one, we have never lost a rhino or an elephant to poaching in this reserve. And that's something to be extremely, extremely proud of. And those are species on the African landscape that are going extinct in front of our eyes. and we're seeing localized extinction happen on a regular basis. We're hearing in a given year, 1 or 2 places a year losing their last elephant, losing their last rhinos, losing their last lions. We don't have that story to tell. Our story is only one of hope and resilience, and it's shown these populations grow incrementally over time.
Majete officials and the communities are always in touch.
We often get together with the traditional authority. There's 6 of them around Majete. They were here well before the park even existed. There are skeletal remains at Poazi Spring that date back thousands of years. So humans have frequented this landscape for a very long time, and it was very much part of their daily living in harmony with wildlife and nature. So and for me, it's so important to respect the culture, respect the traditional structures within the traditional authority. Always respect that first and foremost, and then get them involved in how we manage the reserve. If there are any concerns from their side, let's listen, let's see how we can address those concerns. It's critical that we keep a very close relationship with the traditional structures around Majete.
After building up relationships and all, the reintroduction of the game began, with black rhinos coming in 2003, elephants in 2006, and other game in subsequent years. And this marked the start of an extensive rewarding effort.
So we've got a partnership with the Department of National Parks and Wildlife, and remember, we're in partnership with the government of Malawi. So some of the species came from within Malawi and were made available to us by the Department of Conservation in Malawi. They sourced them from other reserves. We got some animals from Lengwe in Nyala. We got some buffalo from Lengwe as well. And but the species that were extinct in Malawi, we had to bring in at quite expensive to do that. It's costly. And these animals mostly came from Zimbabwe, South Africa, and some of the key species like lion, wild dogs, cheetah come from South Africa. I think always keeping the animals safe, long journeys, long hauls. Finance was always an issue to find donors and loyal donors that were going to support us. And we're very fortunate as African Parks, having an incredible reputation internationally. We're responsible towards the donor. Every dollar spent is accounted for. And our reputation has helped us source funding to make these operations possible, from moving very threatened animals like cheetah and wild dogs to elephants to lions, and moving them great distances, either by air or by on road, and then bringing in veterinary teams with international status to support us and make sure that these events are always successful. And we've had, I wouldn't even say in the Majete history, there's been nothing that I can think of that didn't work out as we planned. All of it has amazingly worked out well, and today we find that these populations are thriving. So the one species or three of the species that need preparation are like cheetah, wild dogs, and our black rhino. And so when you catch them in the country of origin, they've got to go into a BOMA system. They've got to be habituated for the transport, for the journey. That can take anything from a couple of weeks to a couple of months. And once they're ready to be transported, they have to be fairly habituated and tamed down so you can feed them. You can't keep them tranquilized for extended periods of time. So they go through a whole process of habituation to a BOMA and getting ready for being transported. And then it's a long journey. Malawi isn't that close to South Africa. And the longest journey is the South African journey, especially with lions and wild dogs and cheetah and rhino. In some cases in African parks, we've just moved a big group of rhino up to Rwanda. We hired a massive aircraft and put a large number of rhino in. But again, very expensive operation, but the planning started 4 or 5 months ago already to make that operation successful. And in Majete's history, we've had similar events where we've had to bring massive trucks from South Africa. We moved a small population of elephants that have now gone locally extinct from the lake shores of Malawi. And that's the founder population that you find in Majete. But all the equipment, the helicopters, the trucks for transport, you can imagine an elephant weighs 5 tons, 5 to 6 tons. It's not freely available, that equipment, in most countries. Luckily, South Africa has the expertise, and those trucks were all driven up here to make that relocation possible.
One thing proving that Majete is a good home for the game is the rise in numbers of the animals' production. Lions, for one, have risen much, such that the reserve has considered putting them on contraceptives.
So lions, we use contraception as well, so we can mimic natural processes where we can curb the growth rate. And we also look at translocations is another option for lions as well. But because we're working in a closed system, we've got to manage lion population. You can't just let them breed. You either halt their growth by using contraception or vasectomies in the males, or you look at alternatives like moving them out of country or moving them in country and seeing if there are areas that can take lions. The problem with lions, you generally need a fenced area and you need a very big prey base because they need to eat. If they can't eat, they are going to cause problems. They will break out. And so we're very wary of human-wildlife conflict. We don't want that at all. And we can safely say in Majete, we hardly have any human-wildlife conflict. The human-wildlife conflict that occurs is with species that occur naturally on the landscape: bush pig, warthogs, baboons, monkeys, hippo that occur in the Shire River. They don't necessarily occur from Majete or break out of Majete and go and cause damage. But we're very, very wary of human-wildlife conflict. We don't want to see that. So, and that's why we have such a good relationship with the communities, is that we try and avoid that at all costs. So, yeah, we manage it. It's really important to have a solid fence in place to make sure animals aren't breaking out. And that's what I said when we started the interview, is that a fence is there to protect people, but at the same time also protect the wildlife in the reserve. It works both ways. So the one that's of interest right now is the African wild dog, and most probably the most threatened animal in Majete. And they do very well. We've got, I think we would have over 20 right now. We've got one pack of 13 and another pack of 3, but both packs have had babies in the last 2-3 weeks. So we estimate our numbers are like close to 25, 30 wild dogs at the moment. But what's the nice thing about wild dogs, there are a lot of people out there that you can find homes for them. So as soon as those youngsters grow any bigger, we can then make them available to the market. And we have a network of reserves all over Southern Africa that cooperate very closely with each other, looking for new genetic material. So we will try and mimic the process where wild dogs would move over a landscape and move into new areas. We do that as humans. We catch them and move them to a new area. And that's nature doing its own thing. Where there were no fences, animals move freely over the landscape. Because there are now fences, we've got to mimic that process. It's very little you can do. Once you've introduced them, nature is quite resilient, and you get the odd animal that on introduction, we've had cheetah within a day or two get caught by leopard, and that you cannot predict. And animals have to adapt to the environment very quickly, but they're incredibly adaptable. We find that initially our cheetah population took a dive and they weren't doing too well, but they're starting to do better now. And it's animals that have built up a resilience for the area. They've adapted to the vegetation. They've adapted to the landscape, the topography. So it's pretty much in the animals' hands if they're going to adapt or not. But we as humans and conservationists always must potentially predict what those outcomes are going to be and what are those threats. We wouldn't put animals into a landscape where we knew they're going to be threats and they're likely to go extinct. We will always maximize on the opportunity and understand the landscape before we actually bring the species into the reserve. So try and understand what are the risks, and you do a risk-benefit assessment, and the benefits must always outweigh the risks. So, and if you do that thoroughly and you have a critical understanding of your landscape, you're in all likelihood going to succeed in your intervention. So we find we can't directly ascribe anything to climate change, but we know it's happening, and we know it's happening all over the world, and we know the temperatures are rising. What we do see in Majete, we've seen over the last 10-year period, is our rainfall is not predictable. We've just this season now for 6 months had close to 1,000 millimeters. Last year we barely made 500 millimeters. So we've pretty much doubled up on the entire year for last year. And then we've had 3 major cyclone events in the last 5 years. So that's where we're seeing a massive change. And in the park like this, when nature's doing its thing, we don't see the massive erosion, but you still see the damage. It impacts your fencing, it impacts the amount of water in the field, it impacts on your infrastructure. But for us, we need proper research to determine what are those exact impacts. And research is happening all over the world. I don't think it's a novelty now anymore to say that there's climate change. There's definitely climate change. And we just need to see in the long term how it's going to impact us. But right in the foreseeable future, it doesn't look as though it's impacting wildlife per se.
Adendorff continues to say game management is going on well, as they also have a couple of technologies that eases the work.
I think in recent times, what's very fortunate about us, and I'm sure you've dealt with our monitoring department. I could show you right now. I can turn my computer screen, and we're monitoring wildlife as we speak. So when it comes to human-wildlife conflict, we on many of the dominant animals out there, or animals that we know could cause damage to wildlife, or people at least, we have collars. So you see it on the lions, you see it on the wild dogs, you see it on elephants. And these are species, so if they break out, we're very, very quick to react. The community doesn't even know they've broken out before we've reacted and managed to get them back in. So we're preventative in our approach, or rather reactive in our approach, before allowing any human-wildlife conflict to take place. So in recent times, the complaints have been around bush pig, have been around baboons. But like I say, all around Majete, there are those species that occur. So it's a difficult one for us. We try and educate the community out there how to deal with these issues, but it's a very difficult species, especially baboon, to keep within a reserve. They just jump over your fences. They cherry pick what they want to go and feed off. And unfortunately, crops are often preferred diet for baboons, and you'll find wherever people are close to a baboon population, there will be some form of conflict. But the big ones, the elephants, the lions, the buffaloes, no, there isn't such a thing. A couple of years ago, there was an issue with the leopard outside of the reserve. But it's again, leopard occur all the way from Mulanje down to the escarpment, all the way to Majete. They occur in the wild still. You find leopards in cities in India that have learned to adapt to humans and living in close proximity to humans. So it's one of those species very difficult to contain within a reserve. But the species that we can contain by using fences very, very rarely break out of Majete.
Majete Wildlife Reserve has a story worth telling. Transformed from ruin into a shining symbol of restoration, resilience, and hope in Malawi. It is Tourism Month, and you know what? Visit Majete.